That the IMF is a government tool for neocolonialism. We have seen how the IMF serves only the interests of big banks and transnational corporations that seek to desecrate working communities through austerity measures. The IMF and those in the ruling class are funding wars waged against nations that defy their interests, against the people's movements in those nations that dare to fight for their liberation. The United States currently holds the largest voting bloc on the board with 16.52% of the shares, serving as a daunting influence, or an effective veto, on policy implemented by the IMF. The United States alone boasts a financial commitment of approximately $164 billion to the IMF every year. That's $164 billion that are being spent on violent global imperialism, forcing communities of other nations into poverty instead of providing free healthcare, education, housing, nutrition, infrastructure, social services, the list goes on, to the people of the United States that are struggling daily. Exploitation of the masses occurs both abroad and at home, but what exactly does austerity look like here in Los Angeles? Slide one more. In Los Angeles, austerity looks like the homelessness crisis. Luxury housing developments lining the block while tenants get priced out of their units, left with few other alternatives amidst a growing, violent gentrification campaign. Shelters overfilled at capacity, often lacking medicine and hygienics, while LAPD gets paid to harass and destroy tent encampments on their nightly patrol. The city has a whopping $1.73 billion budget for LAPD, which pays for all of the military-grade helicopters that patrolled South Central every other night, terrorizing communities of color. Those same communities often lack access to clean air and water, resulting in a lifespan 12 years less for residents of Watts, a neighborhood in South Central, than those in affluent areas. Slide. Watts, a poor Black and Latino neighborhood in South Central, ranks in the top 5% environmentally hazardous areas in the state of California, right in our backyard. Community initiatives have been developed to educate folks on their contaminated drinking water systems and force local school authorities to remove lead from the pipes. Lead from elementary school pipes. It's no surprise that the average resident spends on average $319 per year on bottled water, a large financial impact on working families and an entirely unnecessary one if Watts simply had the same clean water system as Beverly Hills on the right. Slide. In our public schools, austerity looks like armed security guards on the PE field while classrooms don't have enough funding for materials and textbooks for students to use, nor social workers or counselors on staff. Prisoners in a show of modern-day slave labor save the rich from their burning mansions for pennies a day, while outdoor farm workers are forced to breathe in the toxic chemicals and pollution that result from mass fires with no health care, no support at all. Austerity includes the bargaining of LA City contracts with corporate executives of rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft, who are then given free rein to exploit hundreds of thousands of drivers without any accountability, instead of simply financing an affordable and efficient public transit system. Anyone who has ever walked into a Department of Social Services building understands austerity. The longest lines running out of the door as if we were rationing during wartime. But there certainly is a war. It's a war that takes place on the streets, desperately trying to be masked by those in power, a war between the rich and the poor, where casualties are high and rising every year. Slide. We have the highest GDP of any nation in the world, but we are failing to achieve even the bare minimum of well-being for our people. The services we have are not enough to satisfy the needs of a highly industrial, rapidly expanding, so-called developed nation. Democrats and Republicans alike are responsible for the privatization of education, for bloody wars abroad, for funding border patrol, for restricting access to affordable housing, for upholding the very system that has been in place to oppress us. I wish I could have enough time to talk about our healthcare system, but that's a whole other talk. And so, for these reasons and more, it is of utmost urgency that we require a radical reorganization of society, one that provides for and understands the needs of the people instead of corporate profits. And this is why the PSL is running Gloria La Riva and Leonard Peltier for president and vice president in the 2020 elections. So what does it mean to vote socialism? It's to vote with the working people in mind. It is of dire importance that we challenge the mainstream discourse today in US electoral politics and bring our issues to the very forefront. We must engage in discussions with those around us about issues and always present an alternative option to war criminals and fascists. It is to dissent against a two-party system which forces people to choose from bad and worse and more worse and bad and so on. Bourgeois politics will have you try to believe that this is wasting your vote, but they're only trying to trick you into betraying your communities and voting for whatever bland, uninspiring slice of white bread the Democrats are going to shove down our throats this election cycle. They're trying to trick you into voting to suffocate our liberation. Gloria La Riva is a longtime union organizer and community activist who has played a key role in mass anti-war demonstrations, marches against police brutality, fighting for immigrant rights, women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, the list goes on. Leonard Peltier is an indigenous activist and environmentalist who has been targeted by the FBI and unjustly incarcerated due to his lifetime work fighting against the abuse and exploitation of his people. These are people who know the struggles of working communities. They live and breathe in the struggle and understand precisely the immensity that is required from us to prevent imperialist wars overseas, to confront the climate crisis created by rampant capitalism, and to restore power and prosperity to communities who have had enough of a system that treats them as vulnerable and expendable. Slide. I encourage everyone to check out larivapeltier2020.org and once again speak with Comrade Rihanna tonight if you wish to get involved, and you should. Thank you.